Okay, so the first wave of feminism starts in 1848 and goes until 1920. And those are important dates because 1848 is the first nationwide women's convention, the Seneca Falls Convention. And 1920 marks the ratification of the 19th Amendment. That's the amendment that gives women the right to vote. The goals of first wave feminism were really to increase opportunities for women, to expand equality for women, and to fight against this thing called the cult of domesticity, right? That is, that women's place was in the home, that their whole identity was subsumed to being homemakers and tending the children. And these first wave feminists wanted to basically give women more opportunity to work outside of the home if they wanted to. They mostly focused on getting women the right to vote. That was probably one of their number one goals, but it definitely stems forth from this increased opportunity and equality for women. Key moments within first wave feminism is, as I mentioned, the Seneca Falls Convention. The Seneca Falls Convention took place in New York, that it was very well attended by both men and women. Frederick Douglass was at the Seneca Falls Convention. It was put together by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who you see pictured there. Basically, the goal of the Seneca Falls Convention was to get people to approve of this Declaration of Sentiments. The Declaration of Sentiments, this was, there were about over 200 men and women there. They met in a church in upstate New York, and they basically wanted to discuss the civil and social and rights of women. And they created this document, the Declaration of Sentiments, which was based on the Declaration of Independence and listed all of these changes that they sought. And so the attendees, they discussed their grievances, and they passed 12 of the resolutions that were presented there revolving around equal rights. Okay. The other key moment was obviously the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which prohibits discrimination in voting on the basis of sex. The first wave feminists were aligned with two major movements in the United States. One was the abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement was the movement to end slavery. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott were very ardent abolitionists. They wanted to end slavery. And they work with others who also wanted to end slavery because they sort of saw the equality of African Americans who were enslaved and getting that equality as extending to, the expanded equalities to women as well, because all humans deserve equal rights. Sojourner Truth, who's there, it was an African American abolitionist, but also a suffragist. And so the abolitionist movement really dovetailed nicely into this demand for expanded and universal suffrage for both women and for African Americans. It was also aligned with the temperance movement. So the temperance movement was the movement against alcohol. And there was a sense that alcohol was very harmful to women and families because men would go out and drink. Most women couldn't go into bars and drink. They would come, their drunken husbands would come home, and that it was created a lot of instability for women. And so those were movements that were aligned with the first wave feminism. There were divisions within first wave feminism. One of the major divisions was the 15th Amendment. The division over the 15th Amendment, we've got Susan B. Anthony down there in the corner, obviously a famous suffragette. The 15th Amendment was the amendment that extended the right to vote to Black men, not to Black women, but to Black men. And white upper and middle class women, they didn't like that, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They felt that educated white women deserved the right to vote before what they called field hands, right? And so that those divisions within first wave feminism, they resonate to this day. the ratification of the 19th Amendment was a huge victory for first wave feminists. And, not to say that there was no feminist activity between 1920 and the 1960s. That's not true. There just wasn't the same, sort of level of intensity in terms of feminism. That all changes in the 1960s, okay? And so, as we did with the other slide, so the goals of the second wave feminism were really increasing equality in and out of the home. In the corner there, you see Betty Friedan. And Betty Friedan wrote this book, and it was called The Feminine Mystique. And it sold over 3 million copies in the United States. And what The Feminine Mystique was about was about how women feel in the 50s and the 60s about how they were depressed and they weren't happy with their lives. And a lot of them were self-medicating with alcohol and drugs because they did not feel like their lives were as enriched and exciting as they would like them to be. And that a lot of that had to do with the cultural, particularly for white middle-class women, the cultural demands that you are a homemaker and you don't work outside of the home. And what it means to be a good woman is to do those things. Well, Betty Friedan wrote a book that basically said that's bollocks, right? She basically said that it's no wonder that women are unhappy because their potential is being completely squashed. And if we want women to be happy, we have to recognize and fight against patriarchy and sexism that basically reinforces that stereotype that women belong in the home. And that really, I'm not saying Betty Friedan, was single-handedly, but that just showed how widespread those sentiments were throughout the United States. And it led to, other activities. The key moments were the feminist mystique, but then other key moments were the Supreme Court decisions. Griswold versus Connecticut, which we'll be learning about in class, that gives you a constitutional right to use contraceptives, and Roe that gives you a constitutional right to have an abortion. So control over your reproductive health. And that meant that women could have sex without the fear of consequences, right? That they could have sex for pleasure. And so sexual liberation, reproductive freedom, increasing equality in and out of the home. Those were all goals of the second wave feminists. And they had, significant public policy achievements. The Equal Pay Act of 1963, Title IX from the 1970s, which we will be learning about. This aligned really well with other social movements that were taking place in the 60s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement against Vietnam, okay? But there were clear divisions, as you can see from those pictures there. We've got Betty Friedan. Estelle Griswold. She is the Griswold from Griswold versus Connecticut. She opened a Planned Parenthood to challenge the law that criminalized the distribution of contraceptives. But, you see the development of the National Organization for Women now, and also, sort of a demand for free abortions, and also African-American women fighting against the practice of forced sterilization within certain communities. So a lot of the divisions within second wave feminism, the divisions arose from white middle class women versus women of color and working class women. This idea that you wanted to work outside the home in order to be, to realize yourself, really pissed off a lot of women of color and working class women, because they were like, well, we don't have a choice but to work outside of the home. And so, those divisions developed and for the good, right? Because it really sort of expanded out our understanding of what it means to be a feminist. So that brings us to third wave feminism from 1991 to 2010-ish, right? The end date is sort of not really known. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind about third wave feminism is what happened after second wave feminism. So one of the things that happened in the United States in the 1980s was a huge backlash to the social movements, particularly the movements for feminism, the second wave feminism, and also sexual liberation from the religious right in the United States. As you may recall, Ronald Reagan was elected in a big, election in 1980, and he basically promised to bring us back to these more conservative family values. And we had the rise of the religious right in the United States. There's always been religious conservatives in the United States. There's always been religious folks in the United States. But religious folks, particularly religious conservatives, didn't get involved in politics until the 1980s. But they didn't like what was going on. They didn't like the rise of the feminist movement. They didn't like the rise of the gay rights movement. They didn't like the rise of reproductive freedoms. And they said they could no longer sit on the sidelines. So they got involved in politics. And they aligned themselves, or it's more accurate to say that the Republican Party aligned themselves with the religious right. And so third wave feminism is really sort of a rejection of this rise of the religious right. Because as the religious right got more power politically, they wanted to start taking away rights. Reproductive rights in particular, but other kinds of sexual rights as well. Other goals of the third wave feminism was the rejection of essential feminism. And so you'll be reading about essential feminism in Roxane Gay's article this week. But it's, sort of that kind of hardcore feminism that came out of the radical feminists of the second wave. If you're a real feminist, you don't shave, you don't put makeup on, you don't wear a bra, right? You embrace sort of more of an androgynous look. And by the 1990s, people were sick of that, particularly women were sick of that. They wanted to redefine what it meant to be feminism. They didn't want to be bound by the constraints of essential feminism. And that was coupled with the work of Judith Butler and others who began deconstructing gender, beginning to think about gender as that there's sex, which is biological, but there's gender, which is a performance, right? We perform gender. And so Judith Butler, in her book, Gender Trouble, sort of writes about sort of the cultural construction of gender and how that construction can be deconstructed, right? That if we can construct it, we can and reconstruct it in a way that is more in line with our understandings of the gendered body or no gendered body, right? Key moments there. It starts in 1999 because of Anita Hill. In the corner there, you see Anita Hill. She is a law professor, and she was called to testify at the hearing Clarence Thomas. There were Senate hearings to confirm him on the Supreme Court, and she had been subject to sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas. And so she was called forth by the committee to explore those allegations of sexual harassment. As we know, Clarence Thomas was confirmed, but the highlighting on the honesty and the persuasiveness of Anita Hill's testimony, it enraged people that he was confirmed, or at least some people. And that really started this third wave feminism. This idea that, sexual harassment is still going on. Feminism is still important, even though it's kind of gotten a bad rap coming out of second wave feminism in terms of some of its constraints. So key moments are the Anita Hill testimony, that followed by a lot of women running for Congress, the Year of the Woman. There was the development of queer theory that started at this time, in part by Judith Butler, but also others who were interested in, sort of challenging, we challenged sexism, but we also now need to challenge heterosexism, right? This assumption that being heterosexual, that's the norm. And so queer theory really begins to challenge that. And then, if you read the article, you could read about the Riot Girl Manifesto. Culturally, this was, embodied by this punk rock movement in the United States by women, and how they were basically redefining feminism and redefining it through the lens of punk rock. So you can read more about that in the article. This aligns really well with postmodernism and with AIDS activism. That's where we get the queer theory. And the divisions within it, not great, because there probably weren't a lot of second wave feminists, radical feminists in the third wave exactly. It was mostly transitional and not as oppositional as we saw from some of the other waves. And this brings us to the fourth wave of feminism that's marked as starting around 2010, and it moves into the present moment. And so the main goals of fourth wave feminism are accountability. Fourth wave feminism really revolves around the Me Too movement. And also the election of Donald Trump to a certain degree. And so to remind you, the Me Too movement, while that term was coined earlier than 2017, in 2017, Harvey Weinstein, a movie producer, was accused of multiple accounts of sexual assault and sexual harassment. Basically the people he assaulted came forward, told their stories, and it ultimately led to the removal of Harvey Weinstein from his movie companies. And then ultimately he was convicted for sexual assault and is currently serving prison time. And so that moment really sort of, brings to the forefront the idea that, sexual assault and sexual harassment is basically baked into a lot of our industries, to a lot of our workplaces. And basically women and men were just sick of it, right? And so the Me Too, through Alyssa Milano, the hashtag Me Too goes viral. And basically Me Too means that, I too have been a victim of sexual assault, and people telling their stories, okay? That is on top of the anger that a lot of women felt with the election of Donald Trump. So in the corner there, you see the pussy hats, the pink pussy hats, and then there was this huge women's march in Washington, D.C. Prior to Donald Trump's, or the day after Donald Trump's inauguration. And so, the key moments here, so that's part of the fourth wave feminism. Another aspect of it is that, that fourth wave feminism is really wanting to create a queer, pro-trans, pro-body positive, digital-driven feminism, right? Using the social media tools such as Twitter, Facebook, to promote feminist activisms. And that's why, I have there the alignments of social media, right? So social media really takes off in 2008, and the fourth wave feminism has really used that social media. Dobbs, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I would say continues this fourth wave movement. And then you have celebrities like Beyonce who, sort of are reclaiming that term of feminist. There are clear divisions within the fourth wave feminism. One of the big divisions is a backlash to second wave feminists, and also a backlash from second wave feminists. And you could read more about that in the article if you are so inclined. This pretty much encapsulates fourth wave feminism. All right, that's it for me. Thank you for listening. In our next lecture, it'll be shorter than this one. We will be defining some really important key terms that we'll be talking about throughout the course of the semester: sex, gender identity, etc. Okay? So thanks for your time and attention. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon.